Welcome to the Behind Closed Doors channel. Wishing you a peaceful day. Today, I'd like to share the following story with you. I hope you enjoy listening to my story. Now, please.
The door that closed. The day my mother threw me out of the house, I learned the truth. I had spent more than 20 years under that roof, refusing to name. I had never truly been part of that family. I was the youngest child. People often say the youngest is the most cherished, the one spoiled the most, loved the most, the one parents hold on to longest in their hearts. But that may be true in other families. In mine, the youngest was simply the one forgotten. I grew up under the same roof as my older brother. We ate at the same table. We called the same woman mother, yet we were never treated the same. My brother was 5 years older than I was. From childhood, he was my mother's pride. He was brilliant, top grades, well-behaved, praised by teachers, admired by neighbors, held up by relatives as the standard every family gathering. And me? I was never a bad student. But in my mother's eyes, I was never enough to deserve approval. When my brother scored perfect marks, she told the whole neighborhood. When I scored an 8, she asked why it was not a 10. When he was admitted to university, she prepared 3 banquet tables and invited the extended family to celebrate. When I became a factory worker, she said only one thing in front of guests. He just works for wages, nothing worth mentioning. She said it lightly, casually, as if it meant nothing, but it was enough to make me feel smaller each time. At first, it hurt. Then, eventually, I got used to it. When a person is diminished for long enough, silence becomes a survival skill. I did not argue. I did not resent. I did not ask why. I simply began disappearing inside the very house I lived in. In that house, there was only one person who ever looked at me as though I truly existed: my father. He was not a man of many words. He belonged to another generation, the kind of man who spoke little, worked hard, and hid his love inside quiet gestures. But I knew that every time my mother cut me down, he was the one who quietly placed more food in my bowl. I knew that every night I came home late from work, he was the one who left the porch light on. I knew that when exhaustion overtook me and I fell asleep in a chair, it was he who draped a blanket over me. My father never openly told my mother she was wrong. He only ever said to me, "You are no less than anyone. Your time simply has not come yet." I carried those words for years, like the last match in winter. Then my father died. A stroke, sudden, so sudden that no one had time to prepare. The funeral passed in silence. My mother cried, but it was the grief of a woman who had lost her support. My brother took business calls during the funeral, and I stood beside my father's portrait, staring at his face in black and white, feeling as though the last thing holding my life together had just collapsed. The only person who had ever truly seen me was gone. Standing there, surrounded by incense smoke and the murmur of prayer, I understood for the first time what it meant to have nowhere left to return to. 1 week after the funeral, my mother called my brother and me into her room. She placed a stack of documents on the table. Her voice was cold, decisive. "This house, this land, I've made my decision." I did not expect much. I had never imagined I would receive an equal share, but I believed at the very least that as her son, I might be allowed some small corner in which I belonged. Then I looked at the papers. My name was nowhere. The house, the land, every asset, everything had been transferred to my brother. I read the documents again and again, convinced I had missed something. I had not. There was not a single line that belonged to me. I looked up at my mother. So, I get nothing? She did not look at me. You can take care of yourself. I let out a bitter laugh. And my brother? I left it to the one who deserves it. The words struck like a blade to the chest. I looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in my life, I smiled in front of her. Then what am I? No one answered. My brother said nothing. My mother turned away. And in that moment, I understood. The cruelest pain was not losing property. It was realizing that in the eyes of the woman who gave birth to me, I had never once been worth anything. That night, I packed one old suitcase, a few clothes, some documents. Everything I owned, after more than 20 years in that house, fit into a single worn case. Still, I waited. I waited for my mother to call me back. I waited for her to say one sentence, just one that might ask me to stay. But she did not. It was raining hard. I pulled my suitcase toward the door. The house I had lived in for more than 2 decades felt, in that moment, like a stranger's home. My hand had just touched the doorknob when my mother spoke. Stop. I turned, and despite everything, some foolish part of me still hoped. But her eyes were colder than the storm outside. If you are that useless, then go. She paused. And don't call me your mother again. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. It was enough to destroy everything. I stood still for a few seconds. Then I nodded. Yes. I stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind me. Bang. That sound followed me for 10 years. I slept in a leaking 8 square meter rented room. I worked 3 jobs at once. Factory by day, delivery work at night, loading freight after midnight. There were days I slept only 4 hours. There were months I ate instant noodles so often that the smell of seasoning oil made me nauseous. There were nights I sat alone in that suffocating room, staring at a mold-stained ceiling, wondering, if I died here tonight, would anyone even know? And then I would remember my mother's eyes. Not angry, contemptuous. That look kept me alive. I was not allowed to break. Not to prove anything to her, but to prove to myself that I was not useless. So I began to learn management, accounting, sales. I learned from scraps, from discarded things, from whatever the world threw away. I rose from worker to shift lead, from shift lead to supervisor. Then I saved enough to open a small shop. It failed. I lost everything. I started again, failed again, fell into debt, started again. Once, I sat alone in an empty room, staring at the negative balance in my bank account and laughed. So this is what rock bottom feels like, I thought. Then I learned something worse. Even rock bottom has lower levels. Still, I stood up, every time. And by the 10th year, I was no longer the youngest son thrown out of his home. I had my own company, not large but stable. Employees, contracts, a position, a life in which no one looked at me with pity anymore. I was not rich enough to inspire envy, but I had enough to never again need to beg for anyone's approval. I thought my life and that house would never cross paths again, until my phone rang. Unknown number. It was my brother. His voice trembled. Please, help me. 10 years. Not one question, not one call, not one message. And the first words he spoke were to ask for money. I listened in silence as he explained. His company had collapsed. Debt upon debt. The house was about to be seized. Mother was ill. There was no one left to help. Then he asked, "Can you help me?" I replied with one question. "Which house?" He gave me the address. I laughed, quietly, but enough to make him fall silent. "You don't know? The house is in my name." Before he died, my father had transferred ownership of the house to me. He had told no one. Perhaps he knew. One day, I would need a way to survive. My mother thought she had the right to divide that house. My brother thought it belonged to him. Legally, it had never belonged to either of them. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. For the first time in 10 years, I understood. My father had not saved me while he was alive. He had left me the means to save myself. A few days later, I returned. The old house was still there. The same porch, the same gate, the same water-stained walls. Only the people inside had changed. My brother no longer carried his old arrogance. My mother no longer carried her cold certainty. She had aged. For the first time in my life, I saw her powerless. She looked at me the way one looks at a final chance. Then she cried, "Please forgive me." I looked at her for a long time. The woman who had thrown me out, the woman who told me never to call her mother again, now lowering her head to apologize. I had imagined this moment many times. I thought it would make me feel triumphant. It did not. I felt nothing. Some wounds are carried so long that by the time an apology arrives, feeling has already gone numb. I spoke quietly. "I do not blame you." She looked up. Hope flickered in her eyes. Then I smiled. "But I no longer need you." The words were gentle. Still, they were enough to break her. I saved the house, not because I had forgiven them, but because it was the last thing my father had left behind, so I kept it. But I did not return to live there. I did not reclaim the role of son. I did not rebuild what had already died. Some doors, once closed, are not meant to be reopened. They are meant to remind us why we had to keep walking. I left before sunset. This time, no one forced me out. But I walked away anyway, by choice. At the gate, I stopped and looked back one last time. The place that had once been childhood, once been pain, once been the place where I was erased. Then I turned away. This time, I carried no suitcase. I carried only myself whole at last. Some people only learn your worth when you no longer need them. Some apologies arrive too late, not because they lack sincerity, but because the heart they were meant to save has long since learned how to live without rescue. I came back, but not to return, only to close the door. And in the end, I understood. Forgiveness is not becoming who you once were. Sometimes forgiveness is simply no longer hurting. The door my mother slammed shut that night cost me an entire youth to walk beyond. But that same door taught me this. Not everyone who brings you into this world knows how to love you, and not every family is a place you can return to. If it were you, would you go back?
Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel, like, comments, and share. See you again!